Reminding you that if you've been living under a rock or you haven't heard the news, a public health alert has been issued by the Queensland government under the authority of the Chief Health Officer, who has the power of the Public Health Act in Queensland. And as a result, a public health alert has been issued for a number of locations and flights across southeast Queensland, Townsville and Magnetic Island. You're being asked, all Queenslanders, to monitor the list of exposure venues on the Queensland Health website and follow advice. Bottom line is, from 6 o'clock this evening, a bit over an hour and 20 minutes from now, southeast Queensland, Townsville, Magnetic and Palm Island, so here, and then about 1,500 kilometres away up the north end of the state, will be entering a 3-day lockdown. Anyone who's recently travelled to Queensland from interstate is urged to monitor the contact tracing list on the Queensland Health website for new and updated exposure venues for New South Wales, Victoria, West Australia and Northern Territory and New Zealand. Now, let's take a bit closer look. So, Queensland had 2 overseas acquired COVID cases last night. Both were detected in hotel quarantine. So in Queensland currently there are 41 active COVID-19 cases across the state. 41. And according to the federal president of the ALP, Wayne Swan,
well, it's hardly the envy of the world. In fact, we're probably looking at the greatest public policy disaster in Australian political history.
Whoa.
The failure to secure supply, and the failure to secure diversity of supply. We're all living with the consequences of that right now.
So let's go to Luke Howarth. Luke Howarth is the Liberal or LNP member for Petrie, the federal electorate on the north side of Brisbane. Luke Howarth, has the government's handling of the vaccine rollout been Australia's greatest public policy failure, as stated by Wayne Swan?
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. It's great to be on your show again today, and hi to all the listeners. It's nice to see the federal president of the Labor Party, Wayne Swan, being bipartisan in the middle of a global pandemic. I wouldn't expect much more from him, but the fact
he wasn't being bipartisan, he was being very critical. He was saying that this is the greatest public policy failure in Australia's history.
What a shameful thing to say in the middle of a pandemic, but that's what we're seeing from the Labor Party right
now. Well, unless it's true.
People should remember that next year during the federal election.
Unless it's true. If
well,
it's true...
Not true, but it's not true, because if you look at the results that Australia has achieved in 3 months, because that's how long we've been rolling out the vaccine, 3 months. We started in March, April, May, June. We're about to go into the 4th month. In the last week alone, since I came on your show, last week there was 6,590,000 doses administered. A week later, there's 7,500,000 doses. And that's the comment that the Federal Labor Party want to commit to today.
But they're single doses at the end. In other words, you're not fully vaccinated until you have 2 doses.
Of course not, but what I'm saying is a big increase, and we're right now 29%, almost 30% of Australians have had their first dose, I should say, and 7.4% are fully vaccinated now with their second dose.
7.4%?
7.4% are fully vaccinated with their 7.1%. I can't read my own writing.
7.1%. All right, so let me highlight. This is the lowest, this is the worst performance of all the OECD nations, the grouping that Australia is normally grouped in with. Why are we the worst performer out of all the OECD nations on planet Earth?
Well, that's incorrect, Steve.
We're at the bottom of the list. I'm sorry, it's very clear. We're at the bottom of the list.
You're looking at a list based on the overall results, not on how long we've been rolling out the vaccine. The others started the rollout of the vaccine in September, October last year in 2020. We started the vaccine rollout in March 2021.
Why were we so late starting?
Why we're so late starting? Well, put it this way. If you look at what has happened with AstraZeneca, for example, we were at 1 million doses in before we found out that it wasn't suitable for the young, for the people in their 20s. The UK had done 18 million doses before they found out. So the reason why we were later in starting is because we weren't like lemmings going over a cliff. We wanted to be careful with our approach. But keep in mind too, in all of this, we were the first to declare the pandemic, even before the World Health Organization. We locked our international border. Australians know and your listeners know that they wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. And so don't mind if I get a little bit fired up when you quote the federal Labor Party president who wants to be negative in the middle of a pandemic, because I won't be taking it from him.
I can't recall the date, but I think it was last year that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said that Australia was on a war footing in relation to the pandemic, didn't he?
Well, that's true. We are on a war footing, and that's why you're seeing, since we started the vaccine rollout in March, a very, very quick rollout, as I'm saying, in the last week, almost 1 million doses since I spoke to you last Tuesday. And, obviously, the Prime Minister is right. He's put a Lieutenant General in charge of this vaccine rollout. It's Lieutenant General Fruin, who's in charge and coordinator of Operation COVID Shield, and the Prime Minister meets with Lieutenant General Fruin every week, as well as the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt. And so, yes, the federal government is taking this very seriously. We're encouraging people to get vaccinated. We're encouraging people to maintain social distancing. But we're also saying to people that you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. The federal government has your back, and the states do too. And we don't need people like Wayne Swan talking down Australia in the middle of a global pandemic.
Well, the states are casting doubt on your competence, but if in Australia is only 7.1% of the population has been fully vaccinated, that is at the bottom of the list of OECD nations. In other words, name me a nation that's actually low. Name me a nation that's less than that. You've done that in 3 months, all right.
That's the point, right?
Okay.
That's the point. If you look at what every other OECD country have done in 3 months, you'll find that we're way up there.
We're in year 2 of a pandemic, not year 1, year 2, and we're still only at 7.1%.
So that's because we started vaccinations in March. I mean, the Therapeutic Goods Administration and everyone else hadn't even approved all the vaccinations last year. I mean, we're not doctors. I'm not an epidemiologist.
On that I agree.
So we're making sure that we're not, there was safety first when it comes to that in Australia, and we've been very careful on that.
There have been others who pointed out that the federal government's been taking the advice of the Therapeutic Goods Administration. It's probably not for you, but will there be an inquiry into why the TGA's approval for the Pfizer vaccine was so slow in coming? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay,
no.
neither do I, but my assumption is that there'll be a federal parliamentary inquiry.
We're going to that next week.
Okay, well,
we'll find that out for you next week.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane. My guest is Luke Howarth. He's the LNP member for Petrie. Let me play you this. So, Stephen Miles gave a press conference this afternoon with the Premier.
121 international travellers arrived into Queensland yesterday. 190 are expected to arrive today, and these are putting our community at an unacceptable risk, especially with these new strains which cannot be contained, which have proven they cannot be contained by hotel quarantine.
So Stephen Miles, the Deputy Premier of Queensland. Is the federal government allowing too many arrivals into Australia today, currently?
Is this the same Stephen Miles who not so long ago was criticising us for restricting overseas travellers from India returning to Australia for a brief period and complaining? Is that the same man?
Yes.
Because I can tell you now, 1,000 per week is how many Queenslanders been taking for the last 6 months. So I heard the interview this morning. I think he said 121 yesterday and 109 today.
109.
They've been doing that for 6 months. They've been doing that for 9 months. New South Wales, the Liberal government down there, has been doing 3,000 a week. So if you want to talk about that, they've been doing 1,000 per week for 6 months. It sounds to me that Stephen Miles is losing confidence in their ability, i.e. the state government, their ability to run the hotel quarantine. That's what it sounds like to me. If he can't manage what he's been doing for the last 6 months, and then changes his tune when we say, oh, look, we might just put a bit of a temporary relief on India from Australians returning there while we sort it out. It sounds like we've got an issue and the state government's not confident in their own system.
Well, let me play you more from the press conference today held by the Premier and the Deputy Premier, Stephen Miles.
We will now move to dramatically cut the number of international travellers permitted to return to Queensland. The nation only has one dedicated quarantine facility at the moment, that being Howard Springs, and it is our view that that should be where international travellers return to until there are additional facilities.
So does the state of Queensland tell the Commonwealth, or does the Commonwealth tell the state of Queensland how many arrivals can come in?
Just going back to what he said, is what he's saying is that he no longer has confidence in Queensland's hotel quarantine system, because he just said then...
No, he's blaming you. He said the state of Queensland's cutting the numbers of international arrivals, yes. So did you know, was the federal government been advised that the state of Queensland is going to cut the number of international arrivals?
About 6 months, Steve.
Say again?
Okay. They've had the same numbers that they've had for 6 months.
Okay.
And in relation, right, to quarantine hubs or federal quarantine hubs, they were never to take people out of state hotel quarantine that was agreed under the National Cabinet a year ago. It was to actually allow additional Australians to come in if we needed them. There's Australians overseas that obviously want to come home. It was for that. So, I mean, that's a key point there.
Yes.
The idea of a quarantine hub, wherever, whether it's at Pinkenbar or whether it's the one in Howard Springs, was to bring in additional people there.
Okay.
So the state government need to take responsibility for what they're doing. They're the ones that are putting domestic travellers in hotel quarantine with international travellers. That's caused, as the Leader of the Opposition, David Crisafulli, said this morning, a shutdown in half the country. They're the ones doing that. They're the ones that are ensuring that 19-year-old Queensland health workers that are sitting outside COVID wards are not vaccinated. I mean, Jeanette Young said this morning, this particular individual sat outside the COVID ward at the Prince Charles Hospital. There might be a link there. Well, I don't have to be Sherlock to work that out. Of course, there's a link.
Well, if they'll come on the program, we'll ask that of the Chief Health Officer or the Health Minister. But the Deputy Premier Stephen Miles has announced today at the press conference that they are cutting international arrival numbers. So he said that Queensland's made the decision.
Overseas wanting to come home.
Okay, but let me finish my question, Luke House.
A week and he can't.
He's made the decision. Queensland is cutting international arrivals. It's their decision. They've announced it. They're making it. But they are blaming the Commonwealth for your lack of quarantine hubs. Now, they want a regional hub at Toowoomba. The federal government's given them a proposal for a hub at Pinkenbar. If there is currently one at Howard Springs, which is a regional or remote one in the Northern Territory, why can't we have a regional or remote one here in Queensland, as the state government is requesting?
Stephen Miles can go and open up a quarantine hub in Toowoomba tomorrow. If he wants it at the Well Camp at Toowoomba, they're quite open. There's nothing stopping the Queensland Palaszczuk government opening that up tomorrow. Go and do it if you want it. They can do that right now. You know, I mean, I just think it's a bit rich when, you know, they're sort of saying unite and recover and, you know, everything else. When things don't go right or there's an issue, it's everyone else's fault but Stephen Miles and Anastasia Palaszczuk. That's what we're hearing. And to tell you the truth, I don't really want to talk about what the state government's doing. I just wish everyone would get on the same page. Then, because at the end of the day, I'm getting paid tomorrow. Right, Stephen Miles is getting paid tomorrow, and we're going into a 3-day lockdown. And I've had people in my electorate today, hairdressers, for example, with 3 days of bookings for people from 9 a.m. in the morning till 8 o'clock at night that have to cancel the whole 3 days because it's not considered essential work.
Well, there are a number of
small business in this state. They're not getting paid. Stephen Miles is, and all he wants to do is have a go at the federal government. Get on board and start leading. He is the Deputy Premier. Show a bit of leadership.
Well, the Premier of Queensland is Anastasia Palaszczuk. Let me play you what she said today.
And until we have a large proportion of the Australian population vaccinated, we should be halting or reducing dramatically the number of people. They should only be coming here for genuine reasons and should be quarantining out of, as I've said, look, I've said this before, you should not be quarantining people in hotels along the eastern seaboard.
Is she right? Should we not be having people quarantining hotels?
On the same page as our Chief Health Officer. You'll know 2 weeks ago, Jeanette Young said, when asked about Toowoomba, Jeanette Young said 99.9% of hotel quarantine is effective and it's working well. We don't need anything else. That was Jeanette Young, her own Chief Health Officer. And once again, she's under a bit of pressure because, there's outbreaks and it's everyone else's fault. It's not theirs. We'll take a bit of responsibility, Premier. You're responsible for what you've signed up to do. Just get on with fixing it and we'll all get on the same page. But excuse me getting a bit fired up, but you want to start the interview with Wayne Swan telling us that it's this and that. Well, we're not copping it, right? I'm thinking of people out there and we need to do it. New Zealand currently uses hotel quarantine. It was the agreed method under the National Cabinet. She never raised those things according to what I understand in the National Cabinet on Friday. Get on with helping people. Get on with supporting small business in Queensland if you're calling a 3-day lockdown like David Crisafulli has called for. Don't start playing politics.
So what are the implications? So Stephen Miles has made it clear that the state of Queensland is going to cut international arrival numbers. My assumption is he has to tell the Commonwealth or the quarantine office or the border security people as to what numbers they're going to accept.
Yeah.
So what are the implications of cutting international arrivals? The assumption is that will make things a bit easier.
Well, it'll mean that the Australians that are overseas that want to come home, it means that there'll be less spots available for quarantine. So, as I said, New South Wales at 3,000 a week. If Queensland cuts it to 900 rather than 1,000 or whatever they're doing, that means that less Queenslanders that are over there and people with families that were born overseas that are wanting to come home for whatever reason. And there are legitimate reasons why people have left. People aren't going on holidays and so forth. There are legitimate reasons why people have left, it just means that less people will be able to come home for now. The international borders, but are still shut, and they have been shut since before the pandemic. The federal coalition government shut it.
So the only people who are coming in are Australian citizens with Australian passports and celebrities and business people and Hollywood movie stars and film directors.
Yeah, there could be a few skilled workers, I think, that still come in too. Places where, for example, middle of Australia, farmers can't get fruit or whatever else. But yeah, I'm not across who is let in and when, but and I'm certainly not across, if movie stars come in, whether they have to hotel quarantine like everyone else or pick their hotel. That is done by the Queensland government. You have to ask them about that.
Luke Howarth, thanks for coming on this afternoon.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Luke Howarth is the LNP member for